It's Death, Religion and Doctor Who, the 2023 specials with that Rebel Rabbi and Professor Howard Williams.
Archaeodeathlings, it's me, Professor Howard Williams, joined by my extra special regular guest for my Doctor Who discussions.
Hi, I'm Rabbi Hannah. I'm that Rebel Rabbi.
And we are moving on to the specials following the last Jodie Whittaker season 13 of the revived Doctor Who. And we have three specials that in this video we're going to cover. And before we do that, the Star Beast, Wild Blue Yonder, and the Giggle, we just want to reiterate what we're doing with these discussions. We are both academics with PhDs in our respective subjects. And our aim is not to immerse ourselves in the fandom and the micro detail of discussions of what we think was effective storylines. We're not media specialists. We're not science fiction gurus. But we are, as a theologian and an archaeologist, very interested in the way in which the Doctor Who franchise, to use that term, since the 1960s has represented different aspects that touch on our discipline. For me, it's the past and material culture, and particularly death rituals. For the Rabbi,
it's theology and how the way theology presents itself in pop culture and how it can be seen, streamed through, and kind of threaded through everything we come in contact with.
Because these TV shows are not only reflecting, but producing the very ways in which our societies, Northern Hemisphere, global North or Western or whatever you want to call it, and global interactions with the themes we're interested in. So these TV shows reflect our society's interests and priorities, but also is feeding into and reproducing. So for me as an archaeologist, I know my students and my audiences will know Doctor Who more than they'll know the details of Republican Rome or the details of late Iron Age Yorkshire or whatever it may be. And therefore, these TV shows are a really important window, but also mirror on how we deal with themes that link to our academic disciplines. That's my take anyway.
Yeah, I think so.
So having trawled through the ups and downs of many exciting plots, but frustrating storylines too, in season 13, what are your overall impressions before we do a deep dive into each episode of these three David Tennant specials, where David Tennant is back as Doctor Who?
I found it to be exhilarating. I felt excited by Doctor Who again. You and I have talked about how going through the last season with Jodie Whittaker, it was like we had to plug through it to get through it. And it didn't have the same kind of emphasis, life to it that we've seen in previous Doctor Who seasons. So right away, going into the 60th anniversary specials, I was not expecting much. Like, I love Doctor Who, I love David Tennant, I've loved his run, but I thought, well, why are they pulling this guy out again? Is it so bad that they need to use David Tennant as a way to grab the audience again? But I was pleasantly surprised, more than pleasantly surprised. It was remarkable change of feeling and tone to the way that these three specials went.
Yeah. I thought it was just a joy. It was Doctor Who back to the best. Not because Tennant's there. And I don't think it was anything wrong with Whittaker. There's nothing wrong with Capaldi. We're talking about the quality of the stories and the way the acting has always been good. You could see the joy they must have had in making this. I'm not a particular fan of Donna Noble as a character, but that you can see the dynamic of the actors, the scripts, the humor, and the storylines have twists, but you can actually follow them. Rather, yes, they do the same old frustrating Doctor Who thing of completely making up entire new scenarios and concepts that balls up everything we thought we knew about the Doctor Who universe, and that does frustrate me. And this applies here as it does to the last two seasons of Jodie Whittaker. They introduce a new idea, which we'll come back to, of the the by generation, which I mean, it's honestly, but it's, you can just about follow it. You can actually go, this is the journey we're going on now. This is something different. Maybe they'll come back and explain all that at some later point, or be picked up on. Gives David Tennant an opportunity to come back in as a repeat offender, a kind of repeat cameo, that he is still out there in the universe, at least. But look, I think it was a joy just to watch these plots unfold. Very different triad of storylines, which take us on a really interesting journey. One based, a classic Earth under threat story, a mystery in space story, and then an Earth under threat story again. But between them, and revisiting some old characters. So yeah, I've got nothing fundamentally critical, but equally I would say that there was more of archaeological substance in season 13, though I was critical of the stories, and season 12 before it, than this. But I was just so overjoyed to see a non-nostalgia, because actually there was a bit of nostalgia, but it wasn't over the top nostalgia, but it was very much. And you know what? Let's just say it. There was no Cybermen, there were no Sontarans, and there were no Daleks. Thank the Lord, the Time Lords.
I was worried about that, because as we've spoken about in previous episodes, it seems like they're always dragging out the same set of baddies of the week, and you can only take so much. There's only so many ways that you can write Cybermen. There's only so many ways you can write the Pepperpots, the Daleks.
They're both mechanoid monsters. We're scared of them. They have their own dynamic, but I think it's been done to death. And I was very happy to see them disappear and not come back. Thank you very much. And so on every level, this was a massive improvement. And that's my opening take. So where do you want to go from here? Do you want to go through each episode in turn?
Absolutely. I would love to. Obviously, and also in honor of David Tennant, because in the new series he's wearing his tortoiseshell frames, I went ahead and put on my tortoiseshell frames to go with my hat and my scarf. I think we start right off at the beginning, the first special, and I cannot remember the name of it, so you take
the
it.
Star Beast, which is of course the Meep.
The Meep. Now,
Meep.
From a theological perspective, there's not a lot there for me to talk about. I mean, too much. We have some interesting threads and types of acceptance and gender instances, and that I like that. And there is a little bit of trying to figure out why this existence is happening. What is the reason we're seeing the 10th Doctor come back? Now, we know Tom Baker in earlier seasons tells Matt Smith you might revisit some of the old faces. And I don't know if that was obviously that was foreshadowing, but if they had this in mind from then, I don't think they have that much forethought, or if they just use it as a happy accident. But it was an interesting, when I first see Jodie Whittaker turn into David Tennant, and that just what, it's just oh my goodness. And the opening salvo for this episode for me was brilliant. Him just talking about Donna, how if Donna ever sees him again, she's going to die. And utters, this is my best friend.
Reestablishes the old plots in a new context. You don't need to go back and watch the old episodes, but you're brought up to date.
You know what's going on. Yeah. If you started right from here, you know that Donna is his best friend, that something happened that if he ever sees her again, her brain will explode, and he's been trying to avoid that, and he doesn't know why he looks like this. Yeah. And I just right away, I mean, they really lure you in with this plot, I will tell you.
Because you've got, I mean, I suppose in terms of the simple twist plot, it's a cute little furry alien is being hunted because it's the last of its kind. The rest have been hunted for their fur by the evil Wrath Warriors, and the Wrath Warriors are flying insectoid. They're everything you'd expect from an alien, violent, insectoid alien species. But then, of course, you learn the twist is that the insectoids are hunting down the psychopathic, lunatic Meeps, and this is this Meep is a mass murdering cannibal, and it's a horrible thing, right? And it wants to, so that's the plot, and there's nothing particularly archaeological. The representation of planet Earth is pretty standard. It's London centered. Although I noticed Camden Market Cyberdog with Doctor Who references in it, and Metropolis references too in the art on it. It's a sort of iconic, sort of clothing store. I imagine, I've never been to Camden Market. It's one of those places, the least likely place you'll ever like to see me in London. But my point is, there's a reference to the contemporary landscape of London. There's a indirect archaeological reference when Donald Noble Temple wouldn't change the name to that because it would sound like an old ruin, a noble temple. I like that as just an incidental archaeological reference. I don't really understand why or how the metacrisis of Donna, which is shared with her daughter Rose, is able to resolve itself, apart from this kind of weird, as a male, you won't understand what we can do. And I was just like, that was a bit weird and wishy-washy and a bit just,
I think, I would agree with you. Yeah.
Perhaps that doesn't rub up. Perhaps that unnecessarily detracts from having a overtly trans character very subtly woven into the plot and shown the prejudice they face and the fact they've never felt of this planet, because Rose is able to feel affinity to the Meep when they think it's a good guy, because they say, well, I know also what it's like to walk in this world and not, well, I don't say exactly like this, but I know what it's like to feel like I'm from another planet and not feel comfortable with other people. And I thought that was wonderfully done, in my opinion. But I thought then they sort of messed with it by making that perhaps that sense of disconnection, because they are sharing this multiple identity with her mum. I mean, that made it perhaps messy, and rather than just have a trans person being a trans person and the prejudice they face and the journey they've been on and that sense of dysphoria that's now resolved, that would have been more than enough, and so I'm not criticizing the way the representation of a trans person per se, but I thought that perhaps added confusion and perhaps unnecessary baggage that for a popular audience who may not be au fait with all of the debates and gender discussions and turfy type rhetoric.
Absolutely.
But anyway,
absolutely.
that's just me perhaps overthinking it. But I thought it was a lovely story, lovely characters, and a good twist.
I thought the twist was good. It was not too on the nose. I loved the way they treated the Rose character as being someone who it wasn't overt, like, as a lot of people try to say, they're trying to shove it down our throats. It wasn't overt like that. It was just a few mentions here or there. Is it okay if I call her beautiful? Am I doing the right, and doing the parts of life that parents question? This is the identity of my family. Am I doing the right thing? Am I supporting them in the best way that I know how?
Yeah, so the grandmother misgenders, not in the presence of the character, and then realizes immediately they made a mistake, giving open that sense of for older people, but also people who just are familiar with that person, and accidentally slipping up, and then asking a really dumb question: is it okay to call them
Gorgeous,
why would but also, of course, we should have said this is a mixed race, biracial, whatever the terminology. It's different in the States too, in Britain, but I think mixed race is a term that's more okay in the UK. But this her dad is black, mother is Donna, white woman. So you have that racial element, and then you've got people mocking and calling her Jason, in the street, almost as if it's a overtly being transphobic in a public place, and she just washes that off. Or pushes that back, but it's clearly affecting and part of a pattern. You learn it's part of a pattern of abuse, but you see at least a shorthand some of the dynamics that trans people face. At least I think that's a fair thing to say, as well as people of color face with this intersectional baggage of prejudice and being mocked in the street, which we in the UK we have seen face to face the ugly side of in the last month. The real ugliness of British racism on our streets, and these issues cannot be separated out. You know,
No, you
the
can't.
ratio,
Absolutely.
so I just want to vaguely allude to that, because I think it'd be remiss not to.
No, I would agree with you. I think some of the highlights for me were the fact that they show that because Donna had spent so much time in the TARDIS, and she had that meta crisis, that having her daughter helped kind of take on that a little bit. But in taking that on, like you said, they don't quite go into it, but it's interesting the way they play out the meta crisis is like they're now sharing it. And in sharing it, we find out that it's through Rose, who has inadvertent memories that she has used in her imagination. Her shed, she is painted like the TARDIS without thinking about it. She's making these stuffed animals to sell that are all reminiscent of older creatures we've come in contact with, including the Jadoon, the Ood, the Daleks, the Cybermen.
Oh, yes.
And shows that she kind of retained this intergenerational memory, and it was playing out in real time in interesting and like entertaining ways. I think when I was trying to think this about this in a theological way, I think that this is probably not their intention, but my takeaway from the let it go is often we see that in some like Christian places, let go and let God. If this is burdening you, like to unburden oneself, to just kind of let it go. I don't think that was their intention, but I think what the point was supposed to be was that I think they were kind of taking a little bit of a pot shot at men who don't know how to let go of things, and trying to insinuate that women are better at allowing their emotions to come off of them. And also, I'd like to piggyback off of that, as that I liked the disability representation. We have a unit character who is in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
And we see she's partly mobile, because you can see her moving her legs when she's talking to the doctor. And I think that is very critical understanding that not everyone in a wheelchair always needs it, and that is just as valid. I have been a wheelchair user myself, and so in being a wheelchair user myself, the looks that I have gotten over the years when I can get up out of my wheelchair to do something has been like, well, then you don't need that.
You're cheating.
You're cheating.
The mask has slipped. Look, there she goes. I saw her move her leg. That's it.
That's it. So I thought that was good. I loved that they had outfitted her wheelchair with rockets and stuns.
I needed more of that. And of course, by the third episode, you see that the TARDIS grows a ramp to accommodate her.
Yes, I loved that. And so I just thought it was so refreshing, the context of the episode too. It was just refreshing. And then we see Donna, of course, gets her memory back. And here's David Tennant just like talking to her, because he's like, I can't go through this again. I don't, in that critical moment, I can't watch my best friend who I've been trying to save all of these years. I can't just do that to come back and have her die, which we see doesn't happen. But you can see how much he is connected to this character, the two of them. So I love that. And of course, that sets them up to, you want to go for one more trip? And it's like, no. And they're like, yeah, go. And of course, Donna makes the joke, my husband is great, because any other man might be jealous that I'm going into a box with you. And her husband, of course, was like, nah, it's the doctor. You're fine. Like, I have nothing to be jealous about. And I thought that was cute and just a little bit campy. And of course, we see the inside of the TARDIS has changed remarkably so from the last Doctor. This bright white, almost sterile environment that kind of reminds me of the inside of the first Doctor's TARDIS and the fourth Doctor's TARDIS.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you. That covers everything I want to think, and for I introduces some themes that we're going to come back to, but of course, the madness introduced in the third episode, because you mentioned disability, I think it's important to mention here the sort of irrationality and righteousness that comes forth, those under the power of the Giggle, is manifest in Kate as head of unit, when she takes off her restrainer to protect her, in her disability, a prejudice about the disability, that I see you're walking, and that I think that's really important. So they take it to the level of showing how our internet behaviors, because that whole episode is about basically an allegory for our internet behaviors, of how we're always right and we're always,
I think so too.
is that the right term? But it's certainly
I think so, and I think that's why they framed it in 2023, is because I think they're trying to show. When it comes to that episode, which I know we'll get into, I had that one that gave me a lot of thoughts, especially about theological perspectives on these kinds of behaviors.
So thank you. I think that covers it. So we have this cutie beast that turns out to be an evil beast that gets caught in the end, and the poor Wrath Warriors are the good guys, and the attempt to destroy the planet with a dagger drive that to allow the cutie meep to escape, voiced by Miriam Margolyes, we have to add, is foiled by the Dr. Donna dynamic and Rose joining in. So we move on to the second special, Wild Blue Yonder, which has a strange, amusing, brilliant cameo at the beginning of England in 1666, because Donna's joined back go on another adventure with the Doctor, and immediately she fouls up by throwing coffee all over the console, and the TARDIS goes absolutely apeshit and sends them off out of the universe to the very edge of the universe. But en route they drop into an apple tree in England in 1666 and have a brief amusing interaction with Isaac Newton. Spoilers, not Sir Isaac Newton, man holding an apple in 1666. Is this Isaac Newton? And you can't make it any more ridiculous. But that wasn't the thing. Apparently, of course, the major drama, excitement or upset online was, of course, for this brief section, they cast Nathaniel Curtis, a British actor who has an Indian father and therefore has skin that isn't pure porcelain white, as Isaac Newton. Apparently, that was the major objection in the media to that section. But anyway, I just but the idea is the Mavity gravity, just can't.
After this, the whole rest of the episode, they're saying Mavity. I love that. I did love the callback to River Song with the spoilers. I was like,
yeah.
I love
the word
that.
Odds Bodkins, which appears in it, which I thought was brilliant. But that's just, I don't know if you want to add anything else about that, but another example where our media is still obsessed with skin tone, even though this is a fully British actor with an English mother, but because the person is just looking a slightly, showing evidence of having heritage from South Asia, therefore their appearance is somehow incongruous in a historical representation. But anyway. Yeah,
I thought that beginning was interesting. I thought it was really kind of fun. I'm hoping that as we go forward into Ncuti Gatwa's season, that we are going to see that kind of writing continue. I hope it was not like this 3 and they pulled out their best and then we're back to I'm hopeful, but this is what kind of raised that hope for me, was these 3 episodes. And we find ourselves, if I may, at the edge of the universe in this giant empty spaceship, and trying to figure out how they're going to get out of there, because my favorite part is the TARDIS runs away.
Yes.
And the fact that something is so scary that the TARDIS would run away, rather than be afraid, Donna says, something scared the TARDIS? Let's go kick its ass! Like, without a doubt, she's just like, if this is what's happening, rather than be afraid, she's like, we're going to go run this, whatever this is, down into the ground so our TARDIS comes back. I mean, and I love that go-getter. She's always had that kind of spunk.
It doesn't go as horrific as it, but it has a similar vibe that you're dealing with creatures from outside the universe or alien to the universe, very much like the crystal planet, the scene when they're on the train, the holiday making train, and there's a creature outside trying to get in. It had that vibe. So I mean, I thought, and it had the sinisterness of a robot that's going so slow. It's all the uncanny of space. And the archaeological mortuary archaeology angle, of course, is we learned that the airlock is opened 3 years ago by one and then closed again, and we learned that it's basically the captain of the ship committing suicide to set, because like the Crystal Planet episode, these aliens are trying to enter our universe by mimicking the people they meet so they can gain a foothold. And so
And
the only
flipping
way that captain could escape is to blow up the ship, set the ship to blow up on mega slow, but remove their mind from their ability to copy. So she killed herself, and it's a very dark, because we see the skeleton in the space suit, the helmeted, no, unhelmeted skeleton of a kind of horse-like alien, which is eerie in itself, looking like a Mary Lloyd, this sort of the Welsh tradition of a horse skeleton being paraded. There was that evocation of, it's really uncanny, disturbing sort of body floating around the space station of a person who actively chose to end their life to save the entire universe from these pan-dimensional evil that could enter and destroy. I thought it was very evocative. And when the finally the ship explodes, with Donna and the Doctor escaping at the last minute, you see for a brief moment the explosion, consume that body as well. So it gets its own. The suicide gets a salvation, because it gets that self-sacrifice is given a form of funeral in the explosion of their own setting. And I thought that was very, very evocative in a way that only sci-fi can do, is make us think about mortality and the tragedy of suicide in this instance, but in this sense, suicide enacted to save the entire universe. It's a very noble deed and a very positive deed. I'm not saying that suicide is always or should be considered, anything other than a tragedy, but I'm saying it was a very powerful and disturbing, but in a positive sense, if that makes sense, sort of
it was
representation.
absolutely. And for me, looking at it from sort of the same angle in this idea of martyrdom, and how
that's the phrase I was
historically,
looking for. Yeah, yes, right.
and historically, the way martyrdom has been portrayed throughout religions, to be a martyr is to, especially like in Christian context, to be a martyr is, to be almost saint-like. You're completely getting rid of yourself for the greater good, which is what we see this ship captain did. So in that sense, that kind of very much ties into this idea of how we see ourselves, as if we can save the universe, we're going to sacrifice ourselves. Just like we see in the previous, where Donna says, he's yelling at Donna, "You're going to die," and she's like, "There's 8 million people down there versus me." I'm willing, that self-sacrifice that we read about and we hear about in a lot of faith traditions, about being self-sacrificing, about the willingness to give up yourself for your fellow man, for your community. That's a pretty big deal. And it was such a creepy episode in a good way. I remember us talking back and forth, and I'm just like, oh, this is like in the absence of fear, like the coldness of the space, the starkness of the inside, the way the inside of the ship is portrayed, made it very like scary to watch. Just in that, it very much gave me vibes of A Space Odyssey, where you're just out there in the void, and it makes you think about your place in life. And the ending was great, of course, as it always is, but that's really the only theological theme I can think about this one.
Fantastic. And of course, at the very end, we do have to mention that Wilfred Mott appears in his wheelchair. And this is the last screen appearance of the great actor and comedian Bernard Cribbins, who people will know from films from I haven't even checked, but at least the 1960s, all the way through. He has been such a famous figure in British television and film. I think people who Doctor Who fans who only know him as Wilf, it's kind of a bit, he did, his career was well and truly over long before that, and then he comes back and he's an icon for another generation. But the episode is a memorial to Bernard Cribbins at the end, so the episode is dedicated to that actor. So that just has to be mentioned, doesn't it?
And I loved that part of it. I really loved that, and I loved him seeing Wilf. Wilf was always such a stalwart character for me, in the way when he tells this doctor, because Donna cannot remember, that he'll remember for her. And again, that whole like remembrance, that kind of idea of, especially
Yes.
in a lot of faith traditions, what we remember lives. I think that was sort of what Wilford was saying in that moment was, I'll look
Yeah.
to the sky and remember you for her. So then
Absolutely.
getting to see him one last time, and that connection that you see between him and the doctor, was beautiful. And I love that they did this memorial for him because he was very deserving. And I like you, I love seeing that a whole nother generation got to fall in love with his acting and his character and just the way he was on screen.
Thank you, Rabbi. I'm happy to go on to special 3.
I am too.
The
The
Giggle.
Giggle.
Do you want to kick off with this and give me your impressions?
I will say to you, first of all, Neil Patrick Harris has the worst German accent I've ever heard.
I suppose it's supposed to be, isn't it? It's supposed to be terrible. It's the bang and the boom. It's like
so over the top. And right away, it gets us because right away you see these creepy dolls that he is making. We don't know who he is as of yet. We just know that he's a creepy guy who's got creepy dolls. And suddenly we're thrown into this world where we get shown a character that we have not seen since the first Doctor, and that is the toy maker.
Because this is a godlike figure, and that's why, frankly, this kind of deity stuff I absolutely despise in Doctor Who when they get into, like, I mean, even though I think some of the plots work, this idea of gods, literally God, but this worked pretty well. The Doctor cannot fight the toy maker, cannot beat the toy maker, but the toy maker is bound by his own rules of his own game, and that is the only way to combat him, is to almost like exorcise him, to banish him from the universe through his compulsion, if that's the right word, to honor his own
rule set.
rules.
Yeah, and so it has to be fair.
But the uncanny of dolls and historic dolls, because this is going back to Logie Baird, the inventor of television, and the first face to appear on television is Stooky Bill, and this laugh that is then the laugh of Stooky Bill as first recorded on television. The idea is it's been echoing through our collective internet and psyche to reach a point in 2023 where, for the first time, thanks to a South Korean satellite, 100% of the world has access to the same laugh. Subconsciously embedding. It's that whole technophobia dynamic, constant of sci-fi. But the idea, and we've met with Mr. Magpie and his televisions at the 1950s centenary. So the idea of television as a corrupting force, and the internet as a potential way in which alien powers or superhuman powers can control us as societies, is a repeat theme on Doctor Who. Mm-hmm. But I thought this was particularly scary with the dolls. I mean, the creepy baby Scottish dolls, babbies attacking. Oh, it was just beyond freaky.
It was sinister,
worse than the
way.
angel.
I think I told you had to save me and kill it with fire, because it was.
I like the fact Donna drop kicked one of the dolls.
But what is interesting to me is we see that the way this Giggle gets put into people, it makes them believe that they're always right, that their opinions are the right ones, which incites the humanity into a war. Because the arguments are going, no, I have to be right. I am the only right person. And so we see people looting and beating each other up all over opinions. And to me, that really sets the tone for what they're trying to say. And I think part of it is they're just nailing down this idea of how we behave towards each other, especially in a time of the internet, a time of access to great technology, So you see this being played out in real time. What happens when a society is filled with people who think they're 100% of the right 100% of the time? This is what could happen.
Which is only us. Everyone else is wrong. We know we're the only ones who are right.
We're right. And what gets me in terms of theology with that is we see this in faith traditions. The idea that my understanding of my faith is the right one, thereby yours has to be wrong. My way of worshiping deity is the right way, and anyone else's must be wrong. And how many people argue over that on a daily basis?
Exactly.
And so
Exactly.
I think that this plays into that type of theological understanding as well, especially when given that the underlying text is this character is godlike on the outside of the universe, says in the episode that he's played with literal gods, has played and matched up against gods. And so here we have this character who is godlike and doing all of this, you know, maneuvering. And then we do have a few scenes that are really unnerving, like that gentleman who, has been turned into a pantomime. That is kind of showing the kind of control, and I don't know if it's meant to, but it does kind of symbolize to me the control that sometimes high control religious cults could have over their people. Like those are some of the things I got from it. I could be completely off base from what the writers were intending, but as the audience, some of what we do is interpret what we're seeing through our own lens.
So we have a couple of other interesting dimensions that I've got to we've got to mention about this episode, apart from the uncanny. The main one from two archaeological themes I want to quickly mention is, again, contemporary London is represented. You see an aerial shot over the Thames with HMS Belfast and other historic landmarks of the city, and there's that classic snapshot onto contemporary London that may not be very interesting now, but in 20-40 years time this will be another classic TV show moment that shows London at this moment. The very fact, I don't want to be a pedant, but you said it was in the first episode 8 million. It's actually 9 million is what they say in the TV show.
9 million.
And I had to check, because I'm old fashioned, I'm getting old, and for me London, the default population of London is 6 million, and that's 30 years out of date. So we are approaching, according to the latest stats, we've hit 9 million as a population for London. So I learned something from but there's two. The final thing is actually a back projection storyline about a character that we know from the 6th and 7th Doctor, which is Sabalon Glitz. And Mel, who's one of the former companions of the Doctor, who's come back and is working for UNIT, relays the fact that she stayed with Glitz until the age of 101, when he died by tripping over a whiskey bottle, and he had a Viking-themed funeral. Now, I need to return to Sabalon Glitz to work out exactly how the meaning of that, but I'm looking at the TARDIS wiki. There's this idea that he's a kind of piratical criminal character, but who falls in and supports the Doctor in various different episodes, and even has dealings with the Galactic Heritage Fleet, which are described as an organization as a militarized spacefaring national trust. So that's in an audio story. So I'm fascinated to learn more about Sabalon. But the interesting point is here that the phrase is used so common in popular society now. The idea of a Viking funeral is so now well established in popular culture that we immediately have a sense. Remember that the Doctor himself on Lake Silencio has a burning canoe funeral, which is actually, we learn, is a deception of the it's not the Doctor's burning at all, of course. It's the Tesselector that's burning for the Doctor, giving itself up for the Doctor as a sacrifice, so the Doctor doesn't have to die and to deceive the Silence. But my point is, I'm going off on a ramble to make the point that the Viking funeral is such a common conception in our popular culture that it can be thrown in there without any further clarification, and people have a sense we're dealing with a flamboyant, alcohol-driven, roguish character, and a Viking funeral is seen as an apposite exit, honouring their death. So you'll get the idea. They lived to an old age and they died and were given a Viking funeral, and immediately you got a sense of what an eccentric or roguish but well-loved character. And I'm discussing this in other blogs and other places, but the TV show Vikings and then the TV show Vikings Valhalla repeatedly show different kinds of Viking funeral, but the theme they cannot resist, and even the final series of Vikings Valhalla cannot resist, even the Christian king Canute getting a secret pagan boat burial on water, being burnt with flaming arrows fired from the cliffs of Dover. So you're just going, this is so ingrained now in our 21st century psyche of what a Viking funeral is, that it can be thrown into Doctor Who without any descriptor added, and we immediately get a vibe of what it might have entailed. It's theatrical, it's grand,
it brings to mind that evokes for me as well. The minute she said Viking funeral, it evokes that what we've seen portrayed in the media as what would be a Viking funeral. So
it's not,
and
that's
I think
not
they
really,
meant to.
That's not a key part of this episode, but I think it just, I think it's really sort of has, it just reveals something.
I think it adds. I think it does kind of add to the narrative layers of what is going on here, and the interesting, dynamics that are happening. I loved so much, and you heard me tell you during the watching of this episode that they didn't go back to the well and pick up bad guys. We have a bad guy that they show too. They show on the screen for a brief moment the original toy maker and the first Doctor, and I loved that, trying to give you context, and it's used as a memory thing for our Doctor going, wait a minute, I know this, and then it flashes to his memory as him as the first Doctor, and of course the toy maker, and you're just like, oh yes. And it was so nice not to see the same thing being regurgitated, being reused. And of course, Neil Patrick Harris is great for campy roles. If you want an over-the-top villain who's going to be wide out there and just do whatever, Neil Patrick Harris is your guy. We see him switch to a British accent that is also terrible. I think I could speak with a British accent better than Neil Patrick Harris, and I dare not try and embarrass myself in front of you. He has a terrible German accent, but his idea for what he wants to do is terribly interesting. It was not a regular, run of the mill, I want to take over the world. It was literally, he wanted to see people, reveal themselves almost how we really think, because we see in Unit that when Kate kind of goes off, they take the Z deck off of her and she starts saying all of these things that we would normally not say out loud. We may think them, but we don't say that. Like you mentioned earlier about her talking to the woman in the wheelchair saying, I've seen you walk. So he is really, and they say it's all coming from the mind. It's not an outside source. All of these things that people are saying are already in there. So it's interesting that he's almost like playing a game of revelation. I want to see people reveal themselves, reveal what they think, and then use that against them in a manner that kind of makes them destroy themselves.
I suppose the theological question is, if there is a devil, is the devil the source of the evil, or is the devil the tempter of people into doing evil things that was already in themselves? I know you're from a Jewish perspective, that's not your bag, but
it is. I mean, no, it is. From a Jewish perspective, that is exactly what I see the Hasatan as, is the person who pushes on your Yetzer Hara, your evil inclination, to see if you're going to give in and give into that. So yeah, he's literally, if we want to make that parallel, he is acting in accordance to what he's supposed to do. I'm going to push on this evil inclination in all people and see if they give into it.
Right. Thank you for clarifying that. I yes, that's really helpful. And can we talk about the archaeology of games then? Because
absolutely.
So there's two themes here that I think are important for us thinking about. There's an origin myth set up of the origin of games by the toy maker, and he says that in the Stone Age, the first game, he asserts with like all-encompassing knowledge, he tells the audience that the first game was Stone Age man or people recognizing the ability of playing with a spherical object of a ball, and that comes back because they challenge him to the primordial game of the by-generated two doctors played by David Tennant and Ncuti Gatwa challenged the toy maker to a game of ball as perceived as the primordial game. Now, as an archaeologist, I can tell you with absolutely no certainty whether that's right or wrong. Historically, I've never even thought about what could be the earliest game. I mean, you could make an argument the earliest games are practice mimicking of actually things you do, gathering things, hiding from things, hunting things, fighting people and things as play. Those are the obvious things that come to my mind, but I don't know what the very idea that there was a single game invented by Stone Age man is a bit ridiculous, really. That playful nature is we see in animals of all kinds and characters. We see it in dogs that fight but don't hurt each other. We see it in in chimpanzees and bonobos, and so I don't know. I don't want to make
or sea cows.
Absolutely, we've got to get our manatees in there. They're all these animals have playful aspects to them, and I think it's really important to sort of say that these, while perhaps I'm making a lot out of very little in the show, it's another example of how these myths of origins of our humanity are played with in these pop culture venues, that we're asserted based on what I can understand to be zero or very little evidence that the ball game and then hide and seek was the second most oldest game. And I just think that's an interesting example of I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm just saying it's another example of myth making within popular culture, that a character says. And then the second thing, of course, the second archaeology of games piece that's where it has to be mentioned is the representation of a 1920s toy store, which I have no idea if that's accurate to the 1920s. That's outside of my remit. But the hideously wooden carved, terrifying dolls do chime with what I would expect for Victorian, Edwardian, and early 20th century dolls. Women scary as freak. Things that you look at now with a modern late 20th or early 21st century eye, and you think, were those ever anything other than mental torture instruments, or were they ever things that people played with? The Grosvenor Museum in Chester has sort of mocked up rooms from different ages of Chester's urban past. They've got a 17th century, 18th century, 19th century rooms, reconstructed, and they're with mannequins, positioned, and the dolls are, of course, more scary than even the mannequins of the adults and the children. Is that they sit there looking like absolute things that would make you never sleep. And so, I like, whether it's accurate or not, I like the way that you saw a 1920s toy store where the Stooky Bill is sold as to Logie Baird's assistant, who then takes it and it goes on television. And there's a whole sinister exchange about the fact there's real hair on the doll. I think that is accurate. They did use real hair for dolls. So there's a historically grounded sort of time jump of 1920s to 2023, 100 years, or just shy of 100 years, to give you that sense of progression of the historicity of dolls, that the dolls and other toys are progressing forward. So those are the two toy making themes. I have one final theme to reflect on, but I should shut up and give you a chance to speak.
Oh, no, you're fine. I agree with you. I think, and also I think the idea of the myth making, when you talked about this idea of myth making, because that is kind of what we're doing. Like you mentioned, like 40 years from now, somebody's going to watch these shows and see London as it is in 2023, and it's going to be a snapshot of here. Equally, these things that we're putting into the media could be the myths of the future that people look back at and go, there's a myth of this, and that's how myths emerge. That's how myths originate, is in this idea of oral tradition and sharing. And then that oral tradition gets changed just a little depending on the place of origin. So 100 years from now, we could be seeing people who have an entire religion based around the myth of this doctor because of these things. And I would think that's fascinating. Like right now we see people who believe that the Marvel Thor is really the Thor from Norse mythology, and so right now we're seeing myths being created in that way that 100 years from now might. And that a colleague of mine brought that up the other day, and I found that
Fascinating.
interesting. I find, yeah, the idea of myth making. So when you said that, it kind of, yes, that we're seeing that happen there too. For me, there is an interesting part in that we see something new that we've never seen, if I might touch on that, we've never seen happen. And we don't get an understanding of why it happened, or, well, kind of why, but how it happened. We see that, there's an even number of games that have been won. The Doctor has won one, the Toy Maker has won one, and so they need a a third game one. So to the Toy Maker, he played a game with the first Doctor. He's now played a game with the 14th/10th Doctor, and simply says, I can't play another game with you. I have to play with the next one, and just shoots him. But instead of this regeneration that we expect, including Donna saying, I know you're not dying, but I won't leave you, and Mel, I won't either. And, the last thing we expect, David tended to say, he says, allons-y, and then nothing happens. You
Just
see the
pull.
regenerative energy, and he says, pull. And in seeing this, you see them separate. Here's David Tennant, and here's Nechudi Gatwa, who comes into this life so grandly, so interestingly, but we don't get an
Without
understanding.
trousers.
Without trousers. And he's talking about myth. He's saying bi-generation has been a myth. It's never happened. So they're introducing new myth.
Yeah.
They're introducing new myth into the story, but they don't really go into what it is or what triggers it. They just show it happening. And then, of course, they use that as their leverage for how they beat the Toy Maker. So I find that interesting because they talk about myth there. He's like, it's a myth. It was a legend. But that's legends turn into myth, and that's
we
where
don't know the implications of this, do we yet? And how it will play out. Because there's two doctors in the world. David Tennant's doctor is staying for the moment on Earth with the noble family and
the Noble Temple family, yes. And if I might, and then I'm going to pop it back over to you.
No.
For me, as you know, I told you that these were the moments where I started crying. Is that you see after they beat the Toy Maker, and the Nechudi Gatwa holding David Tennant and saying, I've got you. Like, you've been through it. You've gone through all of this stuff. It's okay for you to take a vacation and learn how to cope and learn how to deal. And Donna says, I know why you came back to this face and why you found me. And because you wanted to come home. And
it's not the first time, because, of course, the Capaldi face is supposed to, the idea already introduced there is that we're returning to a face that's familiar and has a meaning for the journey, the stage of the journey of the character. So that idea is already there, but they don't make an explicit allusion to that. But we're already introduced to that idea.
Yeah, and I that was the part for me where I started crying, because they really showed, to me anyway, that he talks about, and Nechudi Gatwa talks about the fact that he loves Rose and he's loved River Song, and he remembers all of these and he's loved them all. But it's really Donna that was David Tennant's home, Donna's family.
There is another there's a piece of material culture, corporeal material culture, that is important in this final episode, that is like the legacy of the Toy Maker, whether by design or by accident, the one bit of the body of the Toy Maker that doesn't fold in on itself and acquiesces to being exorcised, is the gold tooth, which we learn in some way, does it make clear that the soul or body of the master
has been zoomed in there. Yeah.
So we get the sense that the master lost to the Toy Maker, and is trapped in there. So this isn't the first time that the master's identity, like Sauron, is at least in part imbued in an object. And we've seen that before, that the cremated doctor, the cremated master by the doctor, a ring survives. The master's ring survives and allows him to be resurrected. So cheat regeneration and cheat fate. Here we have the idea that, again, echoing the female hand that picks up the woman's hand that picks up the ring from the cremation pyre of the master, that the gold tooth is picked up from the rooftop. And there's clearly going to be a follow-on story where the master reappears. And now whether the toy master intended that or not, the banishment of the toy master leaves behind that legacy, that potential for future bots, and the material and uncanny of the body, but also separate from the body nature of a false tooth is a very powerful corporeal object.
Yes.
That allow, like a ring that you wear on a finger, or you can wear rings elsewhere, earrings and nose rings and so on. But a finger ring is a very personalized corporeal object that is very easy, given our many fantasy stories about rings, see as an embodiment of the will and the power of and the essence of a person. But here now we have a tooth taking on that role, and the tooth, of course, just is so redolent with overlapping significance of it being a space that has cavities, it has containment. Is there something in the tooth, or is it the tooth? Is it the tooth
itself? There's going to be a lot of questions to answer, and I don't know. I'm excited again for Doctor Who. I know that Ncuti, that's going to be our next run, is Ncuti Gatwa. I'm excited to see where he takes it. I love the way they ended it, that we got the two TARDISes, the one with the ramp that Ncuti takes off in. We see at the ending of this is this family scene where he's literally calling Rose his niece and referring to Donna basically as his sister, and he's got now this family where he's going to be allowed to heal, and he's never really taken the time to do that. In any iteration has he ever taken the time to heal.
And it's a 4-generation family, because Wilf is still alive shooting Mole somewhere, but Mole's protected by force fields so that he can't harm them. Now Wilf is the father of
Donna. Of Donna's mother.
Yeah, so you have Donna's mother, then you have Donna and her husband, and then you've got Rose.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a 4-generation, mixed race family that captures so much of Britain in its composition, with the trans individual as part of that welcoming, homely, included vision, and even a Time Lord is allowed to stay and treat. And Mel is, you're like family, you're allowed to, I just popped in, there's that sense of real sort of wholesome, that hate has been vanquished in all its forms, extraterrestrial and from the very nature of humanity itself, revealed by the Toymaker. And instead we have a recentered, consolidated base of something about us that we should and could be us, should be us maybe, which I think is very important to as a sort of British pivot to the much divisive hatred and austerity and there's even a parodying of the government's, where the government minister said, well, I don't even care anything about any of you. Well, there's nothing, that's one thing that hasn't changed. So there's that sense with that, but I mean, this was filmed at the time when we had Johnson, but then of course we had the debacle of Truss, and then we had Rishi Sunak. These catalogue of Tory prime ministers and their cronies of ever talentless and unable to deliver even a post, a letter, let alone a policy. They've crippled our country, and we're going to take decades to get things back on track. And but it's there's a sense of this is what we could be, if we're, which I think is very hopeful for British people. And have it in the popular television show for children and young adults. I think it's a very hopeful moment to sort of lead us out of that episode into the new era for the new Doctor, who comes across as a bit of there's a love, but there's also a right, get out now. I'm off into the universe now. Fresh start.
Chance. Yeah, fresh start. Yeah. Without and I don't know. I'm very excited. Ncuti was awesome, even without trousers. I remember I said, go put pants on. Go get. I'm looking forward to it. I feel hopeful about the direction the series is taking, and I really hope that it doesn't let us down.
Are there any other thoughts or reflections for us, Rabbi, about the
Not for me.
3 episodes? I think
Yeah,
we've
not
covered
for me.
everything, haven't we? And I just want to finish off by thanking you for putting so much time and expertise, and because this doesn't work if it's one of us. It only works because we've sort of honed this sort of dialogue. And yeah, sometimes we're more optimistic, other times less so about the show. But I think we're able to pull out some interesting themes that hopefully are of interest to people, that reflect on our disciplines, the broader popular culture associated with our disciplines, and this sci-fi series that but as I said, both mirrors and is developing, driving forward our country's or our broader pop culture's sense of identity and on perspectives and issues relating to our fields. Yeah.
Yep. Well, I look forward to the next time. The next
Yes.
time we'll be meeting on this will be Nichuti Gatwa. So I'm looking forward to the 15th Doctor. And thank you for letting me join you. As always, it is a pleasure.
And please check out the previous videos in the playlist where we go through all of the Revive series from Christopher Eccleston, David Tennant, Matt Smith, Peter Capaldi, Jodie Whittaker, and obviously this episode here. And we'll see you again soon. Thank you again, Rabbi.
Bye.
Sadly, we're all going to die. But while you're waiting, why not follow Archaeodeath? Subscribe now on YouTube.